Give it a moment. Nobody told you the whole book. Not the teachers who recommended it, not the YouTube channels that summarized it, not the podcasts that broke it into 10 digestible points. Everyone gave you the version that was easy to package, easy to sell, easy to consume in a commute and feel briefly transformed by. But Napoleon Hill didn't write one book. He wrote two. The one everyone knows, and the one hiding inside the one everyone knows. The public version is about desire and faith and planning and persistence. It's been quoted on 10 million Instagram posts. It's been summarized in 10,000 YouTube videos. It's become so familiar that most people feel like they already know it, which is exactly why it hasn't changed their life. Familiarity is the enemy of transformation. You can't be transformed by something you think you already understand. The hidden version, the one Hill embedded inside the text for the people he called the few who are ready, is different in character, darker in some ways, more demanding, more specific, less comfortable. Hill gave a warning in the original manuscript, a direct, unambiguous warning that most readers skip because it sounds like false modesty from an author setting up his thesis. He said, "This book contains a secret. It will not be named directly. It cannot be handed to you. It must be recognized, and it can only be recognized by a mind that has been prepared to receive it." Most people read that and thought, interesting framing. A few people read that and stopped because they understood that Hill was not being poetic, he was being precise. The secret he embedded in Think and Grow Rich is not a concept. It's not a principle you can write in a notebook and apply on Monday morning. It is a specific relationship between your conscious intention and a deeper layer of your mind that most people never access, not because they lack intelligence, but because they keep trying to engage it at the wrong level. We're going to go to the right level today. But before we do, I need you to ask yourself something that will feel uncomfortable if you answer it, honestly. How many times have you read, watched, or listened to Napoleon Hill's work and felt genuinely changed, not for 3 days, not until the next difficult month, but permanently, structurally, irreversibly changed? If the answer is never, or not as many times as the hours you've invested would suggest, then you haven't found the hidden formula yet, and everything you thought you understood has been the surface of something far deeper. The enemy is not ignorance. If ignorance were the problem, you'd have solved it by now. You've consumed enough content about success, wealth, and personal development to fill a university curriculum. You know the principles. You can name them. You can explain them to other people. You've highlighted the passages and written the quotes on sticky notes and set the reminders and built the routines. You are not ignorant. And yet, the invisible enemy, the one Hill identified but never named, directly in his public writing, is something he described in a private letter to one of his students as the greatest thief of human potential in existence. He called it surface-level engagement with deep principles. Here is what that means in practice. There are 2 ways to encounter an idea. The first way is intellectual. You understand the idea, you can explain it, you can see how it applies. You feel the resonance of it, that satisfying click when a concept makes sense. You leave the book or the video feeling expanded. The second way is cellular. The idea doesn't just make sense to you. It reorganizes you. Something shifts at a level below articulation. You don't just understand it differently, you are different for having encountered it. Hill's hidden formula only operates at the second level. And almost everyone who engages with his work stays permanently at the first. Not because they're not trying, because the entire apparatus of modern self-help, the summaries, the frameworks, the 10-step systems, is designed to deliver ideas at the intellectual level, fast, clean, satisfying. But the intellectual level is not where your behavior lives. Your behavior lives in the subconscious, in the deep programming, in the patterns that were laid down long before you were old enough to choose them. And intellectual understanding, no matter how sophisticated, cannot reach that level. This is why you know exactly what you should do and consistently don't do it. This is why the principle makes complete sense when you read it and evaporates under pressure when you try to apply it. This is why you've been in a perpetual cycle of insight and disappointment, understanding more and more about success, while the gap between your knowledge and your results stays stubbornly, maddeningly consistent. The enemy is the gap between knowing and being, and the reason it feels impossible to close is that every tool you've been given to close it, more knowledge, better frameworks, tighter systems, operates at the same level as the gap itself. You cannot fill a hole by digging next to it. Hill knew this. It's why he embedded the real formula beneath the surface of the book rather than stating it plainly. Because stated plainly, it would have been processed, intellectually filed, understood, forgotten under pressure, embedded the way he embedded it. It could only be found by someone who had stopped reading for information and started reading for something else entirely. We'll get to what that something else is. But first you need to feel the full weight of what you're up against. Because the gap between knowing and being is not a small problem, it is the problem. Everything else, strategy, tactics, habits, routines, is downstream of it. And until it closes, nothing else you learn will stick in the way you need it to stick. Let's be honest about your inner world right now, not the productive version of it. The real one. You have a vision of what your life is supposed to look like. You've had it for years. It's specific in some ways. You know the feeling of it, the general shape of it, the emotional texture of arriving there. And you've been working toward it, genuinely working. Not performing effort, actually putting in the hours, making the attempts, showing up when it would have been easier not to. But somewhere along the way, probably more than once, you've had the thought that stops most people cold. What if I'm doing this right and it still doesn't happen? Not the fear of failure from laziness. The far more unsettling fear of genuine committed effort producing nothing. You push the thought away. You know intellectually that consistency compounds, that timing is unpredictable, that the overnight success took 10 years. You know all of it. But at 2 a.m., in the quiet, the thought comes back. And it brings a question, Hill, identified as the most dangerous question a person can live inside. Am I missing something fundamental? That question is dangerous not because it's wrong, you are missing something, and we're getting to it, but because of what it produces emotionally. It produces a specific kind of searching energy, a constant scanning of the horizon for the piece you haven't found yet, the mentor you haven't met, the book you haven't read, the insight you haven't had, the strategy you haven't tried. And that searching energy, that perpetual orientation toward the missing piece, keeps you in a permanent state of preparation, preparing to apply the formula once you fully understand it, preparing to commit once you have enough confidence, preparing to go all in once you've found the thing that finally makes sense. Hill called this one of the most elegant traps the human mind constructs for itself. The trap of infinite preparation. It looks like diligence. It feels like responsibility. It sounds like wisdom. It is the most sophisticated form of avoidance ever invented. Because the searching, the consuming, the learning, the preparing produces enough forward motion to feel like progress while ensuring you never actually arrive. You are moving. You are not advancing. And the most painful thing about this trap is that it is entirely self-generated. Nobody put you here. No external force is keeping you in the preparation loop. You built it yourself, with the best intentions, from a genuine desire to get it right. And now the very intelligence and conscientiousness that makes you capable of understanding Hill's deeper principles is the same thing keeping you from embodying them. Here is the emotional cycle as Hill understood it. You encounter a principle that resonates deeply. You feel the possibility of it. You begin applying it with genuine enthusiasm. For a period days, sometimes weeks, things move. Small results appear. The momentum feels real. Then something interrupts it. a setback, a plateau, a month where the results don't match the effort. And instead of holding through the interruption, which is what the principle requires, you begin to question whether you've understood the principle correctly. So you go back to the source. You reread, you find a new interpretation, you discover a nuance you missed. You feel the resonance again, and the cycle restarts. Each revolution feels like deepening understanding. Each revolution is actually deepening avoidance, because what the principle requires is not more understanding. It requires sustained application in the absence of confirmation. And the moment confirmation disappears, you retreat to understanding, round and round, until years have passed and you are genuinely more knowledgeable than almost anyone you know about the principles of success, and genuinely no closer to the life those principles are supposed to produce. This is the trap. And here is why the conventional solutions don't touch it. You've tried to break the cycle with accountability. You found a partner, a group, a coach, someone to report to, someone whose opinion of you would create enough external pressure to hold you in application longer than you'd hold yourself. And it worked, while the accountability was fresh. But accountability is borrowed discipline, and borrowed discipline has a return date. The moment the accountability structure weakened, the partner got busy, the group lost momentum, the coaching engagement ended, the cycle resumed. Because the trap was never about discipline. It was about what happens inside you in the silence between actions. Then you tried intensity. You decided the problem was half measures, that you'd been applying the principles at 60% and the solution was to go to 100. Full commitment, all in. Burn the boats. And for a period, the intensity carried you past the point where you'd previously stopped. But intensity without the right foundation burns out. It always does, because intensity is fuel. And fuel runs out. What Hill's hidden formula produces is not intensity. It produces something that doesn't require fuel at all. An orientation so fundamental to who you are that acting from it costs no more energy than breathing. Then you tried simplification. You decided the problem was complexity. Too many principles, too many frameworks, too many systems running simultaneously. You stripped everything back to one thing, the most important principle, applied consistently, no distractions, and the simplification helped for a while. But the one thing kept bumping against the same invisible ceiling, because the ceiling is not strategic. It is not a principle you're missing. It is the relationship between your conscious intention, your subconscious programming. And no strategy, regardless of how elegant or simple, can fix a problem that lives below the level of strategy. The answer Hill embedded in his work is not another principle. It is a mechanism, a specific, precise, learnable mechanism for closing the gap between what you know and who you are. And it requires you to engage with his work in a completely different way than you ever have before. Here is what Napoleon Hill was actually pointing. In the original manuscript, before the editors softened certain passages, Hill described a phenomenon he had observed in every single person who had successfully applied his work at the deepest level. He called it the moment of chemical reaction, not metaphorically. He believed something genuinely neurological happened, something that permanently altered the relationship between a person's conscious mind and their subconscious programming. The chemical reaction was not produced by understanding. It was produced by a specific combination of three elements occurring simultaneously: intense emotion, clear, definite purpose, and complete present moment surrender to the process. All three, at the same time, sustained long enough for the subconscious to register them as a new operating instruction. Most people get one or two of these elements, rarely all three, almost never simultaneously, almost never sustained. The intense emotion without the definite purpose becomes scattered passion energy without direction. The definite purpose without the intense emotion becomes cold planning direction without power. The present moment surrender without both of the others becomes passive acceptance, peace without momentum. but when all three converge, when you are emotionally charged, crystal clear on your purpose, and completely surrendered to the process without attachment to the timeline, something shifts in the machinery. Hill described it as the subconscious mind opening, not a metaphor. A functional description of what happens when the deep programming receives a signal strong enough and clear enough and sustained enough to be taken as a new instruction rather than a passing thought. This is the hidden formula. Not the three elements listed on a page. The specific internal experience of all three converging. And here is why it's hidden. You cannot manufacture it intellectually. You cannot schedule it into a morning routine. You cannot produce it through discipline or consistency or accountability. It happens when you stop trying to make it happen and start being the conditions for it to happen naturally. And that distinction between forcing the formula and becoming the conditions for it is the entirety of what separates the people. Hill's work changed permanently from the people it changed for 3 days. Tell me in the comments, what is the one principle from Hill's work that has resonated with you the most, but that you have never fully lived? The one that makes complete sense intellectually, but hasn't changed your actual behavior. Be specific. Now let's build the system. The actual practical architecture for accessing Hill's hidden formula, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. The first principle of the system is what Hill called controlled attention, and it is the master key to everything else. Most people who study Hill focus on what to think about. Hill's deeper teaching was about how to think specifically, the quality of attention brought to any given mental object. Controlled attention is not concentration in the ordinary sense. Concentration is holding a thought in your mind. Controlled attention is holding a thought in your mind, while simultaneously holding the emotional charge of that thought and sustaining both long enough for the subconscious to receive them as a unified signal. Most people think and feel separately. They think about their goals analytically, and they feel their emotions reactively. The two streams run in parallel but rarely merge. Hill found that the subconscious responds specifically and powerfully to the merger of clear thought and genuine emotion held simultaneously, sustained deliberately. This is why visualization, as it's commonly taught, produces weak results. People picture the outcome clearly, but feel it minimally. Or they feel it intensely for 30 seconds before the picture dissolves. Neither produces the chemical reaction. What produces it is the discipline of holding the clear picture and the genuine feeling together, not forcing the emotion, but genuinely accessing it, and then sustaining both in a state of relaxed, alert focus. Hill documented men who practiced this daily, not for hours, sometimes for 20 minutes, but with a quality of attention so complete that those 20 minutes rewrote years of contrary programming. The mental shift is this: stop practicing visualization as a performance and start practicing it as a merger. Clear image, genuine feeling, held together, sustained past the point of comfort. The moment it stops being effortful, the moment it becomes as natural as breathing is, the moment it starts working at the level Hill described. But that shift in attention only becomes powerful when the second principle is operating underneath it. Hill called the second principle the definite chief aim, but not in the way it's commonly taught. Almost every teacher of Hill's work frames the definite chief aim as a goal-setting exercise. Write down what you want. Be specific. Set a date. Review it daily. That is the surface version. The deeper version is about something Hill described as the crystallization of desire. He observed that most people's desire was diffuse, spread across multiple outcomes, multiple timelines, multiple versions of the life they wanted. And that diffusion meant the subconscious never received a clear enough signal to organize around. The crystallization of desire is not choosing your most important goal. It is the process of eliminating everything except one. Central, consuming, all-organizing purpose, and doing that elimination not through willpower but through genuine internal discernment. The question Hill recommended was not, "What do I want most?" It was, "What am I willing to let everything else become secondary to?" Those are different questions. The first is about desire. The second is about identity. And the answer to the second question, when found honestly, produces a different quality of commitment than any goal-setting exercise can. Because you're not committing to an outcome. You're committing to who you are. The practical shift is uncomfortable. You likely have 3 or 4 things you're currently treating as equally important. Your subconscious is receiving 3 or 4 competing signals, and it's producing 3 or 4 fractional results. One thing, pursued with everything, for long enough to crystallize. That is the definite chief aim as Hill actually meant it. The third principle is the one Hill embedded most carefully, mentioned in multiple places in the book, but never assembled into a single, clear teaching. He called it the operation of infinite intelligence through the prepared mind. Strip the metaphysical language, and here is what he meant practically. The human mind, when operating under the right conditions, intense desire, definite purpose, controlled attention, emotional charge, begins producing solutions, insights, and connections that cannot be explained by the information it has consciously processed. Hill documented this across hundreds of subjects. Men who solved problems they had no formal knowledge to solve. Men who recognized opportunities invisible to equally intelligent observers. Men who made decisions that appeared reckless from the outside and proved genius from the inside. He attributed this to a faculty that most people never develop, not because they lack the capacity, but because the conditions required to activate it are almost never present. The conditions are a mind cleared of competing desires, focused on a single crystallized purpose, operating from a state of calm emotional intensity rather than anxious desperation. In that state, which Hill described as closer to surrender than to effort, the deeper intelligence becomes available, not supernatural, neurological. The brain, in a state of coherent, focused, emotionally charged calm, operates at a measurably different level than the brain in a state of scattered, anxious effort. The practical shift is the hardest one in this system. You have to learn to distinguish between thinking about your purpose and being in your purpose. Thinking about it is intellectual, effortful, produces analysis. Being in it is different in quality, quieter, more present, feels less like working and more like listening. The insights that come from that second state are qualitatively different from the ones produced by analysis. And those insights accessed consistently, acted on immediately, are what Hill's subjects described as the mechanism that made the formula work. The fourth principle is what Hill called cosmic habit force, and it is the most misunderstood concept in all of his work. Most people encounter this phrase and interpret it as a fancy term for the power of habits. Build good habits, eliminate bad ones. Let the compounding do the work. That is not what Hill meant. What Hill meant was this: the universe at every level of scale, from planetary orbits to cellular biology, operates through fixed patterns, rhythms, predictable, reliable, unbreakable tendencies. And the human mind, as part of that universe, operates by the same law. Whatever pattern your mind repeats, whatever combination of thought, emotion, and behavior you enact consistently enough, becomes as fixed and as automatic as a planetary orbit, not because you've built a habit, because you've engaged a force that is larger than habit. The person who has genuinely activated Hill's hidden formula doesn't succeed through discipline. They succeed because success has become their fixed pattern, their cosmic habit, the automatic tendency of a mind that has been operating from the right conditions long enough to have those conditions become its default state. This is not achieved quickly. Hill was explicit about this. The cosmic habit force requires sustained engagement, not perfect engagement, but sustained long enough for the pattern to become self-reinforcing. And here is the critical practical implication. Most people abandon the process right before the pattern becomes self-reinforcing. They engage with the right conditions for weeks, sometimes months, and then when the external results don't yet reflect the internal shift, they conclude that the formula isn't working, and they abandon it right at the threshold. Hill watched this happen repeatedly. Men who were weeks away from the crystallization point, who talked themselves out of it because the evidence hadn't arrived yet. The mental shift is simple to state and almost impossible to execute without understanding what we've covered today. Trust the process past the point where the evidence supports trusting it. Not indefinitely, not blindly, but past the point of first doubt, past the point of first plateau, past the point where every rational signal says you should reassess. Because the formula doesn't produce results linearly. It produces them in a step function flat for a long time, then vertical without warning. And the people who break through are simply the ones who were still standing when the step happened. The fifth principle is the one Hill saved for his most advanced students. He called it the mastermind in its deepest application, not the external mastermind group, but the internal one. Hill believed that every human mind contained multiple levels of intelligence, conscious, subconscious, and a third level he described as superconscious, and that the activation of the hidden formula required all three to be operating in alignment. Most people live entirely in the conscious mind. They think, plan, decide, and act from the surface level. And they wonder why the surface level actions keep producing surface level results. The subconscious is engaged through the practices we've covered: controlled attention, emotional intensity, definite purpose. But the third level, the superconscious, or what Hill also called infinite intelligence, is engaged through a specific practice he described only obliquely in the published work. He called it the habit of mental quiet. Not meditation in the modern sense, not mindfulness. The deliberate practice of creating complete internal silence. No planning, no rehearsing, no analyzing, no consuming and holding that silence long enough for the deeper intelligence to surface. Hill found that the men who accessed this level consistently shared one practice that the others didn't. They sat alone, in silence, with their definite purpose held lightly in mind, not thinking about it, just holding it for a period each day. Not long. Sometimes 15 minutes, but with a quality of internal stillness that most people have never experienced because they have never stopped the mental noise long enough to find out what exists beneath it. The insights that surfaced in that silence were qualitatively different from anything produced by conscious analysis. They were the hidden formula in action, and they are available to you, but only in the silence, which is the one thing the modern world is most aggressively designed to prevent. Here is what happens when you start applying the real formula, not the comfortable part, the part nobody talks about. The first thing you'll notice is resistance from your own mind, not the lazy resistance of not wanting to do the work, the sophisticated resistance of a mind that has been running on surface level engagement for years and finds the deeper level genuinely uncomfortable. The silence will feel unproductive. The controlled attention will feel forced. The crystallization of desire will feel like loss because it requires eliminating things you care about. You will feel like you're doing it wrong. You will feel like the people who make this look effortless must have a natural capacity for it that you lack. You will feel, in the early stages, more confused and more unsettled than you did before you started. This is not a sign that the formula isn't working. It is a sign that the deeper levels of your mind are being engaged for the first time. Unfamiliar is not wrong. Uncomfortable is not failure. You will also face the external version of resistance. The people in your life will not understand the shift. They'll see you becoming quieter, more deliberate, less reactive. Some will interpret this as withdrawal. Some will try to pull you back into the noise because your stillness makes their noise more obvious. Hold anyway. The third form of resistance is the most dangerous. It comes from inside the process itself. You will have a breakthrough, a genuine one, the kind Hill described, where something shifts at a level below articulation, and the breakthrough will feel so significant that you'll want to tell someone about it. Don't. Hill was explicit about this in his private correspondence. The energy of a genuine internal breakthrough is fragile in its early stages. Sharing it prematurely, explaining it, processing it out loud, seeking validation for it dissipates the very force that makes it transformative. Hold it. Live inside it. Let it do its work. The right people will see the result without you having to explain the process. On the other side of this, not as a destination, but as an emerging condition, there is a version of you who operates differently, not dramatically, subtly. They read Hill's work and don't feel the click of intellectual resonance. They feel the quiet recognition of someone encountering a description of themselves, not aspirationally, accurately, because the gap between knowing and being has closed, not completely, not permanently without maintenance, but enough that the principles are no longer ideas to aspire to. They are simply descriptions of how this person moves. They sit in the silence without discomfort. Not because they've mastered stillness, but because they've discovered that the silence is where the real work happens. They hold their definite purpose not as a goal to achieve, but as an organizing principle for every decision, large and small. When doubt arrives, and it still arrives, it lands differently. Not as a verdict, but as a weather condition. Present, noted, not catastrophic. They have stopped consuming Hill's work for inspiration. They consume it for calibration, checking their internal state against the description, making micro adjustments, returning to the process. This person is not special. They are simply someone who found the hidden layer and stayed there long enough for it to become home. That is available to you, not as a reward, as a practice. Here is where I leave you, not with a summary, with a confrontation that Hill himself used to close his private lectures. You have been engaging with the most powerful success philosophy ever documented, and you have been engaging with it at the wrong level. Not because you lacked intelligence or commitment or genuine desire, because no one showed you where the real level was. Now you know where it is. The question is not whether you're capable of going there. The question is whether you're willing to stop doing the thing that has felt like enough, the consuming, the understanding, the surface level engagement that produces the satisfying click of insight without the uncomfortable demand of transformation. That click has been protecting you from the silence, from the crystallization, from the complete internal commitment that the hidden formula actually requires. Hill watched thousands of people stand at this exact threshold. Most stepped back. Not dramatically, they just kept reading, kept learning, kept preparing. And the formula stayed hidden. The few who stepped forward, who traded the comfort of understanding for the demand of being found what Hill had buried there for them. It was never complicated. It was only ever uncomfortable. If you're done engaging with this work at the level that keeps you safe, say so in the comments. Not as a declaration to anyone else, as a commitment to the version of you who will need to be reminded in 3 weeks when the silence feels unproductive and the process feels like nothing is happening, that you already made this decision. And if this is where you come to encounter ideas that don't let you leave the same way you arrived, you already know what to do. The formula was never hidden from you. It was hidden inside you, waiting for the level of engagement that could find it.